guys, welcome back to Higher Deeper. Today we are talking about the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is a book of prophecy, so Daniel is one of the major prophets of the Bible. When we're talking about prophecy and visions, things can get a little bit confusing. Chapters 1 through 6 are not visions, and then chapters 7 through 12 are visions. So we're going to talk about some of the major themes of the book, and we'll talk about some of the specific events in chapters 1 through 6. So we'll just go ahead and get started and jump into chapter 1. Sound good?
Yes.
In the beginning, it's around the year 605 BC, just to give us a little bit of a timeline in our head. And Nebuchadnezzar is king of Babylon, and he comes to Jerusalem and he besieges it, and God delivers that into his hands. He allows Jerusalem to be besieged, and then Judah is now in the control of King Nebuchadnezzar. And so one thing that Nebuchadnezzar, a practice that he had at the time, is the towns that he besieged, he would take some of the most talented, intelligent people with him back to Babylonia and train them in their customs and their literature and everything like that to serve under his command.
So interestingly enough, we learn in chapter 1, verse 17 says, "As for these 4 young men," or speaking of Daniel, and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
So Nebuchadnezzar took them, they were some of those people that he had chosen, and he took them to Babylonia into his palace to learn of his customs.
So as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams.
As we go through the rest of those chapters, that verse is really going to stand out. We're going to see how each of those, the knowledge and the understanding that God gave them, gets them out of some sticky situations with Nebuchadnezzar. So they came into his palace, and they were supposed to eat the food and the wine that the king had determined for them to eat. But Daniel asked the guard if they could not defile themselves in that way. Something in the food was something that he felt would be defiling to him and maybe was against their laws. And so he decided to ask the guard if they could abstain from that and just eat vegetables and drink water. I like that Daniel asks. I know that he has decided for himself that he is going to follow God and he's going to honor God in his life no matter what. So he asks the guard, and he's polite about it. And the guard says he's just worried that if these men look worse than the men of their age, like if they're not eating the food, if they're not properly nourished, then he's going to get in trouble with the king. And so Daniel said, all right, let's just do a little test. Let us try this for, I think it's 10 days, and then we'll see how it goes. And it turns out they looked better than the people who were eating the king's food, so it was all good. So they were able to honor God and not ruffle any feathers at the same time. It was just a test to see if they would be as strong at the end of it.
Yeah, like he felt so confident in his own convictions of how he was taking care of his body that he offered for the rest of the men to do the same thing for a certain amount of time to kind of give proof that what he was saying had merit.
And he trusted that God would take care of them and that they would, fully nourished.
I like that. That was one detail about the story of Daniel that I didn't know.
Sometimes I just read the text and I just think about that stuff, and then it takes me a little time to think of stuff that is like implied. And that made me think about how maybe frightening it could have been, or how much of a negative experience it would be for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to be taken from their home.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar took sacred objects from the temple and put them in his own temple and took them. It's a long journey. They had to go on a difficult journey, and they were taken into his castle, and they're in this place where they don't know the culture and they don't know what's going to happen to them. So we talked about verse 17 and about how God gave these 4 men the knowledge and the gifts and the talents that they needed to protect them in their new situation. They didn't rebel against this new culture that they were learning about. That's a B. There's a little note in my study Bible that I thought was worth mentioning. It says that culture and being faithful to God do not need to be at odds. So a lot of times I we'll think of like modern culture almost as the enemy or something to like stand strong against. But that's not necessarily the right mindset. And I think this is a great example of embracing culture, but drawing hard lines to remain faithful to God. So there are a lot of things that are not against what God says to do that are involved in different cultures and in the modern world.
Yeah.
And when you embrace those and you learn about different customs and they learn about literature, they learn about all different kinds of things. And because they did that, because of the hard work they put into it, they were able to do God's work where they were at. Whereas, because it says that when the king talked with them, he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they proved themselves to him, and so then they were in the king's good graces and were able to make a real difference in his kingdom for the kingdom of God.